What's logic and what's beyond the logic? I think this idea is important because when we learn all the logic and use the mind, in mind we can quickly do the calculation like 1 plus 1 equals 2. But when it comes to our being, biological being, especially when I can use the idea of the human brain computer model, HBC model I mentioned everywhere, someplace else, Nakayama-san came up with this idea. So that explains the two universes, the mind universe and the animal-like universe, or the universe of law of nature is prevailing without the mind. Or inside the mind too, it prevails, but for the sake of discussion, there are two of those entities, so to speak, like identity. One is the mind, and the other one is the animalistic way of how things happen in living beings especially. And at the core of that is, I mentioned about X, the core of who we are, where the law of nature manifests. We are living because of that, and without thinking, this animalistic or the core of our being is functioning. So that's the source, so to speak, and from that we can feel, detect, and even sense that everything is transparent when there's no mind disturbing what's going on in our body. Inner body sensation is the word, vibration or blissful sense or open feeling, emptiness of the mind, connect to that we can be aware, have the sense of being. Except that happens when we are young and a child and playful, but as we add on to the logical part of the brain and the dualistic way, good and bad, beautiful, ugly, all of that, we start to use the calculation, the logic that we build. This takes another 5, 6, 7 years or farther as we are born and develop our brain. So as we become mature, we have this whole structure. So in terms of layer, at the bottom is the X, the core of our life. And then there's the certain logic which we cannot see from the mind, but that is the logic of how the food are processed, and everything happens, that the blood circulate and the lung and heart communicate each other. So that's the foundation, the Garden of Eden, how things happen without the brain, except when we learn the word and the logic and get kicked out of the Garden of Eden, that then we start to have another universe, the universe of the mind. And that's very tricky because what you got in there has all the influence of your parents and all of that. And if your parent is a thief, that's going to be a trouble because you learn the negative thing. But if your parent is a painter, you may become Picasso or the singer or any of those, or the scientist, or the dentist, as a matter of fact, or the lawyers. If you see their parent is having fun in certain occupation, you imprint those ideas to become like that. So your world is shifting depending upon how you get influenced after the birth. And imprinting, the habitual pattern developed and they learn from the good and bad examples, and that clogs up the mind and brain with lots of information, good and bad, right and wrong, this way and that way, and the logic to go with it. And if the wiring is not done right or according to the society's way of doing things, then you get into jail, become murderer or thief, or all sorts of nasty things that can happen. And when it happens, it takes time to fix it because it's already built in many cases from younger days and reinforced over many, many times. So that overcoming those habitual patterns, all bad habit, is not easy, but we can do it by, let's say, meditation or be patient to know ourselves better and then repeat the right conduct. That's what I said, repetition is the mother of skill. We have a bad repetition as a mother of skill to become a murderer or thief or Putin or whoever the words that, the people you can think of. And it's unbelievable but that's their world and they are built in like that, and it's not going to be easy. And if you have a leader like that, the whole world is paying the price. So we have to learn all the skills to go overcome with all sorts of ways that we can find. Of course, we want to learn facing the difficulties to overcome that, going over the bad habit. So that's just the whole scheme of the brain structure and the HBC model and the two universes, the discussion I have had over and over, but maybe not enough. So this time I'm looking at the biological process. We are biological being. So if you think about the brain and the mind, it's very quick because you can see through thinking about this and that and get things done in your image. But in reality, that process may take time when it comes to a severe surprise that you may get, like a meeting, disaster, for example, unexpected things to happen. So what happened is that that's when we talked about the enlightenment or coming up with a wisdom or idea. Mr. Nakayama mentioned the case of the Poincaré from France and Oka from Japan, the mathematicians. They figured out the way of creativity being something like when you have a difficult problem, you use your brain and over and use it. And when you get to the point of not using anything further, that's the no mind, like a meditative state or the zone state, then stay there. It's almost like if you can imagine the distribution of the memories. At the early stage of thinking of this and this is a problem, and you use up all the memories like a cache memory closer to where your thinking plane is. But if you can not solve it, use up all the memories, then the automatic situation happens so that the brain, or by being patient, we go deeper into even the unconscious part. I mentioned about what's the name of the scientist? I always forget. Anyway, there's an electrode touching on the brain, and the person who went through the experiment could remember exactly what happened when he was young or something like that. So within us, in India, they use the word araya memory, the deeper part of the memory. We have those, except we are not using them as readily for the daily life. But when you have a problem, or mathematics case of the Oka or the Poincaré, Oka says, and then Nakayama says the same, that if you cannot think any further, you just stay put for the 3 days or something, and then you find the solution. Because what happens is that the using up of the memories that you can access doesn't solve the problem. So we have a skill, if we are patient, be in the state of still keeping the problem consciousness with you, then it will start to sink into the deeper part of our memory. And in there are those memories, often in the images. So the word's memory is used up, and early in our age, images are there from a younger days, because without the word, you still have the image like animals. So that's the deeper part of whatever is forgotten, possibly. But the human being and the brain has the way of the neuron structure is such that if you can, let's see, how do I say this? It has the ability of self-organizing itself if there's a problem. It's kind of like if you have a wound, cut your finger, the blood comes out. But if you leave it alone, all the cells would work together like a teamwork, network, and then figure out so that the wound would be sealed and the blood stops. The same happens in the brain. That's the self-organizing process, and that's the X, the work of X, the law of universe, or for living being. Something is painful, there's a way of solving it. So the word painful is very good to talk about because when we have a problem, our brain may try to solve it very quickly because it's natural reaction. Like in my case of meditation, I'm so painful, but I don't want to be in this position for a long time. How do I do? So the brain works. But if you let go of it because you cannot solve it, then what happens is thinking something else or go deeper into your consciousness. And then the self-organizing process, which is the creative process, wisdom-generating process to happen. So that's what I want to call that the biological approach of solving the problem. Like the case of the wound, cut the finger and solve it. The brain has the wound. You have a problem of despair or something. Early on, you use up all the whatever you can use, but you cannot solve it because it's a deep-seated problem. But the human being, being a biological being, can have access to that, and that's the connection to the X, the source of our being, the law of nature, liveliness, and the wound healing ability, self-organizing ability would come out if you can maintain patience for 3 days, 3 nights, and all that. So if you experience that instead of rushing and trying to drink or do the drug, whatever the things that if you have a problem, you jump into the, just click the button or do something, that's very premature. And you want to learn much farther than that, not to do that. Not easy, because it's a habitual pattern and more of the wrong habit that you develop makes it more difficult. But that's when we have to realize with some sense and learning that can come over time to point, okay, this is painful, but I'm going to bear with it. Let it be the case instead of reacting to it, because the reaction creates more pain. Because reaction is you're reinforcing the memory of the bad thing that you want to escape. And that's what happened in my awakening experience, that I had the pain, I want to get out of it. The Zen term is that by not having a knot in your rope, you tighten up by yourself because you're trying to escape from the pain. That's natural. But that's when you have to learn the skill to be patient, and that's what happened. And then when somehow the self-organizing self-organizing force started to click in, because I thought, am I trying to escape from the pain? That made me to think in a different way. So as much as I mentioned the Ryokan saying that when you meet disaster, just meet. That's the trick. That's counterintuitive, but that's the years of experience, or months or days, whatever, if you can. And the point is that be aware of what's going on, but stay put for the next day or 2, 3 days if the issue is big. There's a way of nature, law of nature, self-organizing force, and that would help us to resolve it. Not the mind, because mind has limitation, but the second part of the universe, the core of our being, as that force made us to be alive and living now. And that has a way of going over the hurdle, law of entropy, that if there's a problem, they try to fix it. The disease, wound, pain, disaster, whatever the case is. So this may not be the realm of the mind to solve when you notice it. If so, let us think there's a biological being. We are alive, liveliness. There's a strong force that if we are aware, it's functioning, the X, the law of the universe, self-organizing. Just stay put. And if we learn this once, twice, 3 times, I can talk more about it because I have gone through some of those or many of those, and I still react to it. But that's the reason of my talking about this video, voice memo. Let's be disciplined, determined, have faith with that way of nature, the law of nature, the universe, to take over. When you meet disaster, just meet. 1 day passed, 2 days passed, 3 days passed. There's a new world. So that's the message. There's word memory and the logic to play in the mind, but there's an image down deep in our being, and there's a process, self-organizing, to cure the wound. It's nature's way. Mind is self-identity, ego, trying to help. It may have some value, but when you cannot go beyond and connect to the root and find the solution. There's a saying, idea comes from somewhere else, not from within your mind, but you need to be open for that. And there's a biological process, wound healing process that happens. And if we can relate to that, we can navigate our life better. So I believe, and so I practice. I may forget it, but I can be confirming it like I'm doing here, and hope that there's some meaning in sharing this and reinforcing and practicing it and moving forward with courage and sincerity and truthfulness. No ego. Be open. Thank you.